Hello, welcome to Other Perspectives. I'm Nancy Kaplan. Whether you remember the flooding of our city in 1968 or more recent flooding events, you know that Ann Arbor has experienced frequent damaging rainstorms causing neighborhood flooding and pollutants to flow into the Huron River. Much of the damaging flooding and stormwater pollutants are attributed to Allen's Creek. Working to mitigate these damaging events is the Allen's Creek Watershed Group. As active members of the group for more than a decade, Vincent Caruso and Thomas Bletcher work to improve the Allen's Creek watershed and to promote county and city government action in this effort. Welcome, Vince and Tom. I'm so glad you could be here. So let's start really at the beginning with the boundaries of Allen's Creek. I mean, we have 7 creek sheds that come into Ann Arbor. What makes Allen's Creek different from Mallett's or Traver, one of the others?
Well, Allen's Creek is unique in that it's contained completely within the city of Ann Arbor. In that case, the city can handle whatever it wants to in the creek without going to other communities and asking permission or getting cooperation, which is should make it easier to affect change in the creek shed.
Okay, and let's give some real boundaries for people so they know where. Do you want to tell us, Tom, where these boundaries are?
The Allen's Creek watershed is located mostly on the western side of Ann Arbor. Rough boundaries from basically the U of M Central Campus on the east to I-94 on the west, and on the south from Scioto Church Road, the Pioneer High School site, basically to the Huron River, encompassing most of the west side of Ann Arbor.
Okay, and we have a schematic of Allen's Creek, and so you could tell us, maybe explain where we're seeing these, the main tributaries, the main drains, and if they can bring up that schematic, that would be great. So there are the main branch and the 3 tributaries. Can you tell us kind of like where they are roughly?
Well, the main branch runs down along the railroad tracks.
Okay.
From the U of M stadium area, actually at the golf course is where it starts, and it flows to the main drain, and then you have the Eberwhite branch, which starts up near close to stadium and flows down through Eberwhite Woods. Most of the drain, unfortunately, is enclosed, so even though we're describing it, you won't be able to go out and look at the creek, because mainly the creek has been enclosed in pipes.
Okay.
The other branch is along Dexter, I believe, which comes together at West Park with the Miller branch, or the Fairgrounds branch.
Miller Road drain.
Right.
Yeah. And they all come to the main branch before it goes to the river.
Very good. All right, so that people have an idea. Yes?
There is another branch that is best identified as at the Y, the new Y, and running west, called the Murray-Washington branch of Allen's Creek. Okay.
All right, so now we know where it is. Give us a little bit of history, because Allen's Creek, it really is a legally established drain, as you were saying, you know, maintained through the office of the elected Washtenaw County Water Resources Commissioner and the Utilities Department of Ann Arbor.
Right.
So there's very little, as we say, daylighted. There's very little of the creek that you see. But what are the reasons? How did it come to be, you know, in a drain or in drains? Can you tell us just why?
Well, mainly because like a lot of urban communities, they use the creek as a convenient means of getting rid of waste materials from manufacturing, like tanning or stables or other businesses in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And in the 20s, people were complaining about the smell of the creek, the flooding hazard, and they asked that the creek be enclosed. And so a fair bit of it was enclosed very early on. not like under, a lot of communities with, urban centers, they thought that was more sanitary
Right.
to keep contact at a minimum
Right.
to the water that was contaminated. And some of the water was contaminated with sewage, either on purpose or accidentally, mostly accidentally in Ann Arbor, since we have a not combined sewer system. Our stormwater goes in one pipe and our sewage goes in another pipe, whereas other communities have a combined system.
Right. Okay. So, as I said, you're part of the Allens, with an apostrophe S there, Allens Creek Watershed Group.
Right.
And in 2001, a management plan was developed by your group, and that was incorporated into the Water Commissioner's plan. And so,
and also the DEQ's management portfolio for watersheds as well.
Okay. So tell us then, what are the major objectives, if you can kind of outline some of them for us, of your management plan, water quality and that kind of?
Well, what's unique about our management plan is we did it all with volunteer effort. There's other creek sheds in Ann Arbor and in other places where they've gotten up to $300,000 to do a similar management plan. We did ours completely as volunteer effort. We did the research, did the writing, and got it through the different offices and got it approved. Some of the main issues that we brought up early on were the notion that we wanted to bring the creek shed back to a more normal state and not make it a drain, but make it a real watershed, a real creek shed. Eventually, it's years from now, maybe we would daylight parts of the creek, if not all of it. Back when we started, they considered the Allens Creek an Allens Drain. In fact, it was very difficult to get them to even call it a creek. It was Allen Drain legally, and that's what they were calling it. So it was very basic at the beginning, trying to just get this notion of the value of urban watersheds. That's become much more accepted now. EPA is pushing for, in fact, daylighting urban streams and daylighting streams in general to bring the light in the air to the stream and get people connected back to the watershed and care about it.
Okay. So when I looked at it, you did talk about in there the plan about reducing water volumes and velocity and pollutants. Correct? Is that correct?
Yes.
And soil erosion. So there's a real plan there of what the group did on their own, right, and presented and was accepted. So before we get into a discussion of major problems with impervious surface, because I know impervious surface, let's define several key flood terms. We have a visual that we can bring up. There we go. And maybe, Tom, you can just read some of those off and explain. Can you read it well enough? I have a picture of it if you'd like to see it closer. And so you can tell people what the center is, the dark blue, and maybe work your way out.
That would help. The dark blue on the illustration represents the stream channel itself, that of course in the case of Allens Creek, for the most part, except in some far parts of the west side, is enclosed in a concrete pipe or concrete structure. The area immediately, the lighter blue, adjacent to the stream channel is the floodway. The floodway in a storm event that exceeds the capacity of the stream channel is the area where you have moving water. And the floodway is a good thing to stay out of in the case of a flood event. The one in this illustration is described as the 100-year floodplain, or the 100-year floodway. The next lightest blue area that covers the rest of the area, referred to as the flood fringe, is the floodplain area that floods, designated again as a 100-year floodplain. Now, 100-year floodplain, of course, is a confusing term because that does not necessarily mean once every century. What that really means is 1% chance of a flood of that magnitude arriving at any moment. You could theoretically have a 100-year flood on Tuesday and another one on Wednesday.
Okay.
But it's a design term designed to tell you capacity and so forth that you need to design into a drainage project.
Okay.
And these have very specific legal, I mean, of all the issues we'll probably discuss, these are probably critical to understand for residents of Ann Arbor and anyone living near an area that might flood, because the laws as they stand now refer to the 100-year floodplain and the 100-year floodway, and building restrictions occur, and different building restrictions occur differently in the floodplain and in the floodway. In Ann Arbor and in the United States, it's generally illegal to build residential in the floodway. In the floodplain, there are other restrictions on building. Typically now, they would be built on stilts. If at all, some places don't even allow any building in floodplain as well as the floodway. So they do have legal standing, and they're very important if you go to buy a home to know if you're in the floodplain. If you're in the floodplain, you qualify for flood insurance. Mm-hmm. And the only place you can buy flood insurance is through the federal government right now. There's some talk about changing that, but especially if you get a bank loan, you'll probably be required to get a flood insurance if you're in the floodplain.
Okay, and that picture included a picture of flooding near Fingerly Lumber, which is part of the Allen Creek, right? Floodway or floodplain? Floodplain?
I think near the railroad is probably
Yes.
floodway.
Okay.
The railroad is basically really
Yes.
close to the old creek
Yes.
bed because it was very level, because nature leveled it.
Right.
And so they built the railroad tracks along it because it was probably more economical,
Okay.
like a lot of places do, unfortunately.